Okay, before we jump right into the deep end today, and trust me, the water is not only deep, it's practically bottomless, I do have to start with our standard disclaimer. This podcast is distributed free of charge on all major platforms for educational purposes. We are here to explore ideas, challenge assumptions, and maybe break your brain a little bit, but we are absolutely not telling you what to believe. We are simply guides looking at a very specific, very strange map.
Exactly. We are explorers of the text, not dogmatic teachers. We just present the map. You have to walk the territory yourself. And today's map is, well, unique is one word for it.
Unique is definitely putting it mildly. Today we're looking at something that is simultaneously chilling, like existential dread kind of chilling, and honestly hilarious. It's a combination that really shouldn't work, but somehow in the source material we have today, it absolutely does. We're going to question the literal floorboards under your feet, and then, can't believe I'm saying this, we're going to talk about citrus fruit.
It is a really fascinating blend. We are looking at the fundamental nature of reality, which can be terrifying if you think about it too hard. But it's handled with this certain wit that takes the edge off just enough to keep you from, spiraling into the abyss.
Yeah, let's set the scene properly for everyone. We are taking a deep dive into session 287 of the early sessions, book 7 of the Seth Material. And the specific date of record for this one is September 21st, 1966.
Right. It was Wednesday night. The session started at exactly 9:00 p.m.
And for those of you who might be new to this, Jane Roberts is the medium, the author, the vessel, whatever term you prefer. She goes into a trance state, and the personality known as Seth speaks through her. Her husband, Rob, is just sitting there in the living room, writing it all down in shorthand. And on this particular Wednesday, Jane had absolutely no clue what was coming.
Which is often when the absolute most profound material comes through. I mean, when the conscious mind is completely disengaged, it just leaves room for the unexpected. And we really must credit the publisher, the New Awareness Network, who have done the incredible work of preserving these archives. Without them, this deep dive wouldn't even be happening.
Absolutely. Okay, so the hook for today. Why should you, the listener, care about a transcript from a random Wednesday night in 1966? Well, because Seth basically looks at our entire concept of physical objects, the chair you're sitting in right now, the phone in your hand, and casually says, oh, that's a mass hallucination.
It challenges the very solidity of the world, and not just objects, but time and space itself. He actually suggests that a painting hanging perfectly still on a wall possesses more motion than a car driving down the highway.
And the universe is shaped like a tangerine.
A tangerine, yes.
I mean, I love a good metaphor, but that one really threw me for a loop. So we have mass hallucinations, paintings that explode, and a fruit-based multiverse. Are you ready to unpack this?
I think we have no choice. The concepts here are fundamental to understanding the whole Seth philosophy and the nature of existence. We just have to dive in.
Let's start with something we all think we understand. Experience. If I apply for a job, they ask for my experience. I say, hey, I have 10 years of experience in audio production. I think of it as a timeline. Year 1, year 2, year 3, layer upon layer, like sediment in a rock.
Right, that is the linear view. It is exactly how we structure our biographies. It is how we build the ego story. I am this because I did that for 5 straight years. But Seth just opens the session by dismantling that immediately.
Completely tears it down.
He really does. He says, and I quote, experience is not built up layer upon layer along the lines of continual moments. Basically, experience has nothing to do with time as you know it.
Nothing to do with time. That is such a bold statement. If experience isn't time, what is it?
Seth argues that experience is felt strictly in terms of intensities and value fulfillment.
Intensities, okay. So basically quality over quantity.
Precisely. But it's even deeper than just quality. It's about the actual density of the psychic event. Think about it. You could sit at a desk doing data entry for 5 years. It is repetitive, low intensity, low engagement.
Soul crushing.
Exactly. You are technically alive, but are you truly experiencing? Technically, yes, that is 5 years of quote-unquote experience on a resume. But compare that 5-year stretch to a car crash that lasts maybe 5 seconds.
Ah, wow. Or the exact moment you first fell in love. Or the moment you picked up the phone and heard terrible news.
Exactly. The car crash happens in an absolute blink. But the imprint it leaves on your consciousness is massive. You remember every single detail. The smell of the burning rubber, the sound of the glass shattering.
Or the way time seems to slow down.
Right. The adrenaline spiking, the sudden sharp realization of your own mortality. That 5 seconds contains more psychic data than 5 years of data entry.
That makes so much sense. I couldn't tell you what I had for lunch last Tuesday, but I can tell you exactly what song was playing on the radio during a fender bender I had a decade ago.
because the sheer intensity burned it right into the fabric of your being. Seth literally says, as you should know, an experience lasting only a few moments can outweigh in significance a much more lasting one.
You know, this honestly validates my entire life strategy. I've always had a horribly short attention span. I jump from thing to thing. I used to feel bad about not sticking with one boring thing for 20 years, but Seth is basically saying, no, you're just chasing intensity. You're doing it right.
In a way, yes. It is all about the density of the event. Value fulfillment isn't about endurance or suffering through boredom. It's about the richness of the emotional and psychic data you manage to gather. The soul doesn't punch a time clock. It measures growth.
Okay, so if we accept that experience is all about intensity and not time, that completely changes how we look at reality, because where do we actually experience the most intense things? Often it's not in the office.
No, it's not. And this is what leads us into the discussion of dreams, which is where things start getting really trippy. Usually, our default mode is to think waking life equals real, dream life equals fake, or fantasy, or just a dream. Seth flips this table over completely.
He flips it, sets it on fire, and walks away.
He sure does. He asserts that the dream experience is independent of physical time. And because you aren't bound by the ticking clock in a dream, the intensity is felt much more directly. He says you have more direct connection with reality in the dream state.
Wait, hold on. A more direct connection with reality and dreams, but in my dreams, I'm like flying over a neon city, or I'm back in high school taking a math test I didn't study for, or I'm talking to a giant marshmallow. How is that more real than paying my taxes?
Because paying your taxes involves navigating an incredibly thick layer of camouflage.
Camouflage?
Yes. Physical matter. Waking life requires you to constantly translate your raw inner energy into physical objects and linear time. You're filtering pure consciousness through a very dense restrictive mechanism, the physical body and the physical rules of the world. In dreams, that filter is much thinner. The camouflage is less strict.
So when I'm awake, I'm like a diver in one of those heavy, lid-lined deep-sea suits. I'm clumsy, I'm slow, and I'm only seeing the world through a thick, murky glass visor.
That is a brilliant analogy. And in the dream state, you take the heavy suit off. You were just swimming in the water directly. The intensity of the water is felt right on your bare skin without the barrier. Seth mentions that it is less camouflaged in the dream state. This is exactly why dreams can be so emotionally overwhelming. You are literally touching the raw nerve of reality.
That perfectly explains why a vivid nightmare can just ruin your whole morning, or a wonderful dream can make you feel high all day long. The emotional payload is just pure. It hits harder.
Correct. When you feel fear in a dream, it is unadulterated, raw fear. It manifests instantly as a monster chasing you or a sudden fall. In waking life, if you feel fear, you might repress it, or you might project it onto your boss, or it might take 10 years to manifest physically as an ulcer. The dream is immediate. It is direct action.
And this leads right to the chilling realization we teased in the intro. If the dream world is closer to basic reality, what does that make this world? The world of microphones, coffee cups, and traffic jams.
Oh, this is the major pivot point of the session. This is the moment where the floor just drops out from under you.
It's the quote that actually made me stop reading and just stare blankly at my wall for 10 minutes. Seth says, "It must be understood, however, here, that all physical objects are also hallucinatory. They may be called mass hallucinations."
Just let that sink in for a second. Mass hallucinations.
I mean, I'm looking at my microphone right now. It feels cold. It's made of metal. If I drop it on my foot, it's going to hurt. It feels very, very real. But Seth is telling me it's a hallucination.
He is using the word hallucination in a very specific, mechanical way here. He isn't saying the microphone doesn't exist. He isn't saying it's imaginary in the sense that you can just wish it away and poof, it vanishes. He is saying it doesn't exist independently of us.
Okay, unpack that for me. Because to my mind, a hallucination means seeing something that just outright isn't there.
In Seth's terms, it means seeing something that is projected from within. In the waking state, we collectively agree on a strict set of rules. We agree that energy will look like solid matter. We constantly translate our inner expectations and beliefs into these physical forms. The microphone is there because your consciousness and the collective consciousness of everyone else is projecting it there as a functional symbol of communication.
So it's a shared interface, like a video game server.
Yes. Think about a massive multiplayer online game, an MMORPG. You log in and see a castle. Your friend logs in from across the world and sees the exact same castle. You can both walk into it. The game physics absolutely prevent you from walking through the stone walls. But does that castle actually exist as stone and mortar inside your hard drive?
No, it's just lines of code. It's data being rendered for a screen simultaneously.
Exactly. Physical matter is the rendering of our collective psychic energy. It's the camouflage system we've agreed upon to interact with one another. It allows us to manipulate concepts physically. It slows things down so we can learn from them without being overwhelmed by instant manifestation.
And the difference between a real waking object and a dream object is just what then? Persistence.
Mostly stability and mass agreement. In the waking state, we translate inner reality into physical objects that stay put. In the dreaming state, Seth says we translate ideas into pseudo-objects.
Pseudo-objects. I really love that term. It sounds like a gadget from a retro sci-fi novel.
It implies form, but mutable form. In a dream, you might be sitting on a chair, and suddenly the chair turns into a tiger, because the underlying idea or emotion behind it changed. The emotional tone shifted, so the object instantly shifted to match it.
Right, there's no lag time.
Exactly. In waking reality, the idea of the chair is locked into place by mass agreement, by the mass hallucination, so it stays a chair even if your mood changes. But both the dream tiger and the waking chair are translations of energy. Neither is the actual root reality.
This naturally brings up the topic of travel. And I don't mean booking a flight to Cabo for the weekend. I mean consciousness travel, astral projection, out-of-body experiences. Because if objects are just these agreed-upon hallucinations, what happens if you wander away from the area of agreement?
That is the million-dollar question. Seth discusses what happens when you project your consciousness away from our specific physical system. He explains that if you travel beyond a certain range of intensities, the pseudo-objects completely vanish.
Because you've essentially logged off the server.
Essentially, yes. You have left our specific camouflage system. The familiar shapes, houses, bodies, trees, mountains, those are specific to our frequency, our agreed-upon intensity range. If you move your consciousness far enough out, those physical metaphors just stop working.
That sounds utterly terrifying. If all the objects vanish, what is left? What are you looking at?
That is the big question. And it leads us directly into what Seth calls the undifferentiated areas.
The void.
The void, yes.
Let's talk about this because the description Seth gives is honestly haunting. He talks about these boundary areas between different reality systems.
He calls them the uncamouflaged areas or undifferentiated layers. Imagine them as the empty space between radio stations. You know when you slowly turn the dial in an old car and you lose the signal of one station, but you haven't quite hit the frequency of the next one yet?
You just get static, white noise.
It's actually worse than white noise. It's pure silence. Seth describes it as a silent area. He explicitly says thoughts are not perceived there because the symbols that form our thoughts, words, visual images, concepts of space, simply don't apply.
That's the part that really gets under my skin. Thoughts, as a rule, would not be perceived here. I can't even begin to imagine not thinking or trying to think, but having the thought dissolve instantly because there's no atmosphere to carry the sound waves, so to speak.
He says images would appear and disappear with great rapidity. Imagine you were out there in the void and you panic. You might try to project a familiar image, like a friendly face or your childhood bedroom, just to comfort yourself. You try to impose your familiar camouflage on the void.
Just to have something to hold on to.
Right. But because the environment there doesn't support that type of camouflage, the image just slides off into nothingness. It won't take hold.
It's like trying to build a sandcastle in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane or writing an essay on the surface of water.
Yes, it just dissipates. And he links this directly to the concept of infinity. He says, you are in touch with infinity in such undifferentiated areas, for it is only camouflage that gives you your conception of time.
So without the camouflage of ticking clocks and daily sunrises and human heartbeats, you're just standing face to face with raw, infinite vitality.
Vitality is the perfect word, and the one Seth uses. It's important to note it's not just empty, dead space. It is composed of the very vitality that forms the camouflage of all the other systems. It is the raw, unshaped clay before it's been molded into a pod. It is the raw electricity before it hits the light bulb and becomes light.
But for a human consciousness that is so used to only looking at the finished pots and the glowing light bulbs, seeing the raw, formless clay is totally bewildering.
It's sensory deprivation on a cosmic scale. It's being completely alone with the raw power of the universe, with absolutely no symbols or objects to hide behind.
And yet he says it connects everything. These void areas act as boundaries, but they are also the inner roads between worlds.
Which brings us finally to the tangerine.
The tangerine.
We made it to the fruit.
I feel like we need a literal drum roll for this moment. Seth, this highly advanced, non-physical entity, is explaining the complex, mind-bending structure of the multiverse, the terrifying void, the nature of infinite vitality, and he reaches for this analogy. He says, the systems are more like the various segments of a tangerine, with the uncamouflaged boundary areas like the white membrane between the tangerine sections.
It is so brilliant in its sheer simplicity, it grounds this wildly abstract concept into something you can hold in your hand.
So Universe A, our universe, is one juicy slice. Universe B is another slice right next to it. And the void, that scary, silent, thoughtless place we just talked about, is the pith, the white stringy stuff.
The membrane, exactly. It separates the segments, keeping them distinct so the juice doesn't just bleed into each other and mix into chaos, but it also fundamentally connects them. And it is made of the exact same organic material, just organized differently. The membrane acts as both a protective wall and a bridge.
I'm never, ever going to peel a cutie the same way again. I'm just going to stare at my citrus snack and whisper, multiverse.
But there's a much deeper implication here that we can't miss. Seth says the tangerine represents a group of many systems, yet the tangerine itself is, and this is a quote, but one small portion of an unperceived whole.
Oh, man. So the tangerine is just one single piece of fruit hanging on a massive tree.
Presumably. Or one fruit sitting in a massive crate of fruits. The scale of it is just staggering. We are down here obsessing over the tiny details of our one little segment, our one little agreed-upon hallucination, while there's an entire infinite orchard of reality out there.
And he talks about how you actually travel between these segments. Because we usually think of travel as strictly linear, point A to point B in a straight line, like driving a car down Route 66 or flying a spaceship to Mars.
Right, traversing space over time. But Seth says real travel between different dimensions or systems isn't linear at all. You don't go across space. You go through intensities. You have to literally push through the membrane.
You have to change your internal frequency to pass through the white pithy stuff and pop out into the next orange slice.
Exactly. This is why he says time is completely meaningless in this context. You aren't moving through seconds and minutes. You're moving through states of being. If you could travel this way perfectly, your physical body would just be suspended. You wouldn't age a second. You could experience centuries of events in another system in a literal flash of physical time here.
It's pure Narnia logic. You go into the magical wardrobe, live a whole heroic life as a king or queen, grow old, come back through the coats, and absolutely no time has passed in the spare room.
Precisely Narnia logic. Because time is a property of the specific segment, not a property of the whole tangerine.
But he also warns that bringing that information back across the membrane is incredibly hard.
Very hard. Our physical brains are hardwired for the camouflage system. They are wired for linear time and 3D space. Trying to download a nonlinear, infinite, formless experience into a linear biological brain is like trying to download the entire modern internet onto a 1990s floppy disk.
It just instantly crashes.
Or it comes out completely garbled.
Right.
Or highly symbolic, where the brain just desperately invents images to represent things it literally cannot process.
Which is actually a perfect transition to Jane's physical experience at the end of this session. She comes out of the trance and she's super groggy.
Very groggy.
Yeah.
She called the feeling far out, which is wonderfully 60s of her.
And she retains this specific visual as she's waking up. She sees spirals.
Yes, she says she saw spirals all interlocked without being regular. And she describes feeling an accordion-like opening and closing of time.
That spiral image feels so important to me. It's not a straight line. It's a spiral. It circles back on itself, but always on a slightly different level. It feels like the structure of DNA or the shape of galaxies or
the way we experience learning and growth. We circle back to the exact same lessons over and over, but hopefully from a slightly higher perspective each time. It reinforces the idea that structure definitely exists in the multiverse, but is not the rigid, unbending grid we think it is.
Now, speaking of structures that aren't what they initially seem to be, let's pivot and talk about art.
Yes. This is honestly one of my absolute favorite parts of this particular session. It's where Seth stops sounding like a quantum physicist and suddenly starts sounding like an impassioned art critic.
He pivots entirely to talking about paintings and poetry, and he says something that any artist or art lover listening to this will feel deep in their bones. He says a painting is concentrated experience and compressed perceptions.
It connects beautifully back to the very first point we made about intensity. Think about what a painting is physically. It is a physical object, a piece of stretched canvas, some wood, and smeared paint. It is flat, it hangs silently on a wall. Spatially, it is dead. It does not move an inch.
But
But Seth says, and this is a stunning quote, "In a good painting, these almost explode when perceived by the lively consciousness of another."
explode, that is such a violently active, kinetic word to use for looking at a quiet piece of art.
It is an explosion of psychic data. The artist puts hours, days, maybe even years of intense emotion, hyperfocus, and raw intensity into creating that image. All that invisible energy is literally coded into the physical paint. When you, the viewer, stand in front of it and really look at it, you unlock that code. The energy is instantly released. You are suddenly washed over by the exact intensities the artist felt.
So it's basically a psychic time capsule that detonates the second you look at it.
Yes, Seth points out that paintings have motion, yet the painting itself does not move. The actual motion is the movement of your consciousness traveling deep into the reality of the work,
He calls this state the spacious present.
which is a psychological state where time just ceases to exist and there is only the now. When you are truly deeply lost in a magnificent piece of art or a great song, do you notice the clock ticking on the wall?
No, never. You sort of drift away from the room completely. You lose yourself.
Exactly. You have entered the spacious present. You have stepped out of linear time and stepped fully into the artist's reality. Seth argues that true motion has absolutely nothing to do with physical space. The only real motion is that of the traveling consciousness.
That is just so mind-bending. So a sports car driving 100 miles per hour down the freeway is, in a very real way, displaying less true motion than me sitting perfectly still on a bench, staring at a Van Gogh painting, if my consciousness is traveling deep into the emotional reality of that painting.
According to Seth's physics, yes, absolutely. The car is merely moving through the camouflage, the space. The viewer of the painting is moving through the root reality, the intensity.
I love that perspective. It gives so much more profound weight to the simple act of creation. Art isn't just nice decoration for your living room, it's engineering a consciousness trap, or better yet, a consciousness vehicle.
It is a vehicle. And Seth notes that this profound mechanism is often shielded even from the artist's own waking ego. The painter might not intellectually know why they chose to make that specific brushstroke of blue, but their inner self knows exactly what emotional data it is compressing into that spot for someone else to find later.
Now, speaking of art and creation, we have to talk about the artifact included in the source material for this session. We have this very deep, heavy, metaphysical discussion about the illusory nature of time and the terrifying void. And then we have a scribbled, goofy verse about a birthday.
Yes, the infamous verse titled, "To Bill Gallagher."
It's basically just a series of terrible puns on the word Gethsemane.
It really is. I'll read a bit of it. "The Garden of Gethsemane is just one too manami."
And it goes on, "You knock your brains out for a penny may not one enemy and dare make an enemy."
It is entirely playful.
Yeah.
It is almost completely nonsensical.
So why include this? Why does a highly evolved, non-practical entity who is busy cracking the fundamental code of the multiverse take time out of the session to make bad puns?
Well, first, there is a practical context. This poem was used as a physical object in a sealed envelope experiment for the very next session. They were testing if Jane, while in a trance, could clairvoyantly perceive the contents of a sealed envelope. But beyond the clinical test, it really shows the incredible range of the Seth personality. Seth is not some dry, dusty, humorless professor lecturing from a podium. There's humor. There is a deep sense of play.
It almost reminds us not to take the hallucination too seriously. If waking reality is essentially a highly structured dream, you might as well make a joke while you're in it.
Exactly. The humor balances out the chilling aspects perfectly. If the universe really is just a giant tangerine and we are just tiny consciousnesses crawling around on one single segment, trying not to fall into the void, we might as well laugh about it.
So we've covered a massive amount of ground today. The myth of time, the startling reality of dreams, the stark terror of the void, the citrus-shaped multiverse, and the exploding paintings.
It is a lot for anyone to digest in one sitting.
If we have to distill this all down for you listening right now, what are the big, actionable takeaways?
First and foremost, experience is intensity. You have to stop measuring your life in years or hours logged and start measuring it in moments of high emotional and psychic engagement.
Second reality is a construct. What we see around us is a mass hallucination, a camouflage we all implicitly agree upon so we can play the game together. It's a tool, not the master of your existence.
Third, the void is the glue. The terrifying silence between reality systems is where the raw, infinite power actually lives. It is scary because it lacks our familiar symbols, but it is the ultimate source.
And finally, art is magic. Literally, it's an advanced technology for compressing pure experience and completely defying physical time.
I think that sums up the core of Session 287 beautifully.
So here is my final provocative thought for you, sitting there listening to us right now. Look around whatever room you're in, pick an object, a painting on the wall, a framed photo, even just your favorite coffee mug sitting on the desk.
Ask yourself, is it really just sitting still?
Or is it vibrating right now with the hidden intensity of the idea that originally created it? Is it a compressed explosion, just waiting for you to really, truly look at it so it can detonate?
And taking it one step further, if we really do live in a collective mass hallucination, what happens if you decide to consciously change the hallucination? What if you decide to change the channel?
That is the ultimate question. If you want to dive deeper into these ideas, and I mean, clearly you absolutely should, you need to go directly to the source. We are just scratching the very surface of the tangerine here today.
We strongly, strongly encourage you to study the Seth Material books directly for yourself. There are volumes upon volumes of this profound information, and each one is more fascinating than the last.
You can find all of them at the New Awareness Network website. That address is sethcenter.com/the early sessions. Go there, buy the books, support the ongoing preservation of this mind-blowing material so we can keep talking about it.
It truly is an investment in your own fundamental understanding of reality.
Until next time, try to keep your camouflage on loosely, stay out of the void if you can help it, and we'll see you in the next segment of The Tangerine.